Welcome to the Harrisonburg Fire Department. I'm Larry Shiflett. I'm a former fire chief for the city of Harrisonburg, having retired in 2016. Before we get started into the museum, I'd like to take just a minute and give you a description of the Harrisonburg Fire Department, just so you know a little bit about who we are and who you're visiting today. The Harrisonburg Fire Department is composed of about 100 people, those who work in the fire stations and in the administrative office, which is where we're located today. The fire department has 4 fire stations, has 4 engine companies running out of the 4 stations that I mentioned, and 1 truck company. We also have a training facility and the administrative office. The advantage of having our museum in the administrative office is that you can walk throughout this museum and stick your head in any office that you see if you have a question or need some explanation as to what it is that you're viewing. People in the offices will be more than happy to come out and take a few minutes and spend some time with you and explain whatever you need. If you're ready to go, we'll step into the museum and get started, but first let me thank you for coming by the museum and visiting with us this morning. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask anybody that you see. The display in front of you is a display of parade uniforms from the early 1930s, that the various fire companies in Harrisonburg used. Fire departments back in the early 1920s and on up until the 50s or 60s were as much social organizations as anything. If you didn't belong to the fire department, you just didn't belong. It's kind of like the Elks Club or the Eagles or an organization like that. So the fire companies usually had a significant number of members. Every fire company, and at that time there were about 5 or 6 in Rockingham County, and there were 2 in Harrisonburg. They all had lawn parties. A lawn party, if you're not familiar, is just, it's another word for a carnival. And the fire companies throughout Rockingham County and Harrisonburg, 1 week during the summer, would have their carnival, or as they called it, their lawn party. The lawn party would consist of the carnival starting on Monday night and going through Saturday night, and every Friday night, somewhere in Rockingham County or the city of Harrisonburg, there was a fireman's parade. And the fireman's parade consisted of the firefighters showing up in uniform and marching somewhere from a starting point to the lawn party grounds. And it broke up there at the lawn party grounds, so everybody's there and enjoying the carnival or the lawn party. Hose Company number 4 was one of the 2 volunteer fire companies in Harrisonburg that eventually became the Harrisonburg Fire Department. The other was Fire Company number 1, and these uniforms that you see are uniforms, parade uniforms from both Fire Company number 1 and Hose Company number 4. This is Fire Company number 1 uniform from the 20s and early 30s. This is a ladies auxiliary uniform in a men's uniform, same organization, Fire Company number 1, but later. This was 40s and 50s. And the red and white uniform is a example of Hose Company number 4's marching uniform. And these uniforms were used, the last 2, the green one and the red ones, were used up until the 50s. At that time, volunteerism started to wane throughout the area and really throughout the country. It was not unusual to show you, give you an example of what I'm talking about. I don't know how well you can see that, but you can pick the picture up off the shelf here and take a look at it. But look at the number of firefighters that are in uniform that showed up to a carnival or a lawn party. Now I don't know where this was, but this was typical of the number of people who would turn out for a parade. The typical parade lineup would be, you would start off with one of these banners, somebody carrying these banners that you see on the wall here. Behind the banner you would have the men, this number of men marching. Behind the men you would have the ladies auxiliary in their uniforms. Behind the ladies auxiliary you would have the fire truck. And some of these fire companies with the numbers would take up a whole city block. So firemen parades back in that era were a big thing and got a huge turnout from the community. Now, some fire companies were lucky enough to have a band or some type of music to march to. Others just marched up the street and tried to keep in step on their own. Hose Company number 4 had a drum and bugle corps, and I'll show you an example of their uniforms here in just a minute. But the whole procession would be led by the drum and bugle corps playing music, and the men and the ladies then marching to the drum and bugle corps. The parade always had prizes. They had prizes for the best appearing fire company, for the best appearing ladies auxiliary, for the best appearing fire truck, for the fire company coming the longest distance. And some of these companies would come from 50 and 60 miles away, wherever the parade was. But the idea was to show your best as you went by the judges' platform, and try to win the prize for the best appearing fire company and the best appearing ladies auxiliary. The uniform that you see on the end, the blue uniform, is a city paid personnel uniform that belonged to my father. My father was assistant fire chief for 38 years here in Harrisonburg, and that's the uniform that he had when he served as assistant fire chief. I mentioned Hose Company number 4's drum and bugle corps just a few minutes ago. This display is an example of the uniform and the drums and the bugles that Hose Company number 4's drum and bugle corps used when they were marching with Hose Company number 4 in the parades. You can see a couple examples here of the drum and bugle corps. This is one of the drum and bugle corps posed in front of Hose Company number 4 fire station, which sat right here on this corner of Elizabeth Street. And there's also a photo here of Hose Company number 4 in the line of march, marching up Main Street, just south of Court Square, past what used to be People's Drug Store. People's Drug Store is no longer located there. But if you're familiar at all with Harrisonburg years ago, this photograph will bring back some memories. There are a couple of items in this display case that are very interesting. This is an old fire bucket, an old leather fire bucket. This came out of Maryland somewhere. I'm not quite sure exactly where, but it was given to the museum to display a number of years ago. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, fire companies quite often used what was called a bucket brigade. And a bucket brigade basically was when they went to a fire, they would identify a water source. It could be a water trough, it could be a well, it could be a creek, or anything that from which they could get the water that they needed to fight the fire. And the idea was they would form a bucket brigade from wherever the fire was to wherever the water source was. And you had two lines. One line of people took the buckets down to where the water source, they filled them up, passed them to the next line of people that passed them back to where the fire was. Somebody threw the water on the fire and just repeated the process over and over. These were so important to communities that most communities had ordinances that required homeowners to have a leather bucket. If you owned a mercantile establishment or some type of business, you might be required to have 2 or 3 buckets, or maybe even a dozen, according to the size of your business. But they were so important to the community, again, that there were actual city ordinances that required homeowners to have a bucket hanging on their front porch. And it was hung on their front porch so that if you weren't home and somebody was running to the fire, they could grab the bucket off your porch. Now, whether you got it back or not, I don't know, but the fact of the matter was the bucket was available for them to use. There's another item here that's, I think, is very interesting. This is called a fire rattle. Again, the late 1800s, early 1900s, fire was a significant threat to most communities. The reason being that all the buildings were made of wood, everybody heated with a fireplace or some type of wood burning device, and the buildings were often very closely built together, or close together. So that if you had a single fire could wipe out a whole part of town because of those issues. At night, they would pay somebody to go throughout the town to be on the watch for fire. And if they saw a fire somewhere, they would carry a device like this. If they saw a fire somewhere, They would use it to alert people who were sleeping that you need to get up and go, there's a fire somewhere. This is called a fire rattle, and it's used just like that. These things were made of various sizes, made out of various configurations, but they all did the same thing. They made this loud clacking noise so that if you were asleep in the middle of the night and there was a fire, the person responsible for patrolling at night for fire would use this to wake you up. What you see before you is a hose reel that was built in 1894 for Hose Company Number 4. These things were commercially available in this and other configurations that weren't exactly like this, but very similar to this. It all depended on what you wanted as to what you bought. But this hose reel was built in 1894 in Harrisonburg. It was built by a man named John Morrison, who at one time was mayor for the city of Harrisonburg. The hose reel is the first piece of equipment that was owned by Hose Company Number 4. The purpose of the reel is to carry fire hose. Back in those days, fire hose was consisted of leather hose that was riveted together, so you can imagine how inflexible it was. But that leather hose was loaded on this reel, just like you see this hose, and was carried to the scene of the fire with the firefighters pulling this reel. Now, this reel, you think, well, you know, how does a couple of people pull this? Well, it takes more than a couple of people to pull this. You've obviously got the handle right here that can be pulled. There was a rope that snapped in here and went out however far to the end of it. But the idea was it would take about a dozen people to pull this reel up and down the street. The reel is heavy, the hose is super heavy, so it takes a lot of manpower to get it to where you're going. The rope would stream out from here. There would be handholds on the rope, tied into the rope, and there would be anywhere from 10 to 12 people pulling this reel up and down the street. The street right behind us here is named Liberty Street. And just matter of fact, Liberty Street used to be named German Street. It was renamed in World War I. It was renamed from German Street to Liberty Street. Again, just a little fact. But Liberty Street is pretty flat, so pulling this thing up and down Liberty Street, you know, it's a chore, but it can be done with the people that are here. If you're familiar with Harrisonburg, we've got Market Street. East Market Street has a huge hill on it, probably with about a 10% grade. Imagine how much effort it would take to pull this reel up East Market Street. The only thing I don't know about how these reels were handled is, what do you do when you're coming down East Market Street? You know, how do you hold the reel back, or how do you stop the reel? The only thing I can figure is maybe they turned it around and went down backwards. I don't know. Again, that's one thing that I still don't know about as far as these reels are concerned, is how they stopped them. But again, it was the first piece of equipment for Hose Company Number 4. There are additions that were added to it. This started out with a metal rim that you can see right here. Later on, this rubber rim, which would make it easier to pull, was added, and you can see some repairs have been made to that to hold that on there. There were contests that the fire companies had when they had their conventions. There was always a firemen's convention, you know, once a year, Virginia State Firefighters Convention. And they would have contests with these things. And the contest consisted of taking this reel, starting at a designated spot, pulling this reel to a fire hydrant, or hooking the fire hydrant with a hose, pulling a reel on down the street a couple of 100 feet, detach the hose, put a nozzle on it, turn the fire hydrant on, and the time that it took you to do all of that was what determined who the winner was. Hose Company Number 4 had a state-recognized team for a number of years for being one of the fastest teams, or being the fastest team in the state as far as going through that whole process. So not only were they for the business of fighting fires, again, there was also an element here where you know, there was some fun involved as far as being a hose reel team. What we have in front of us is a series of fire extinguishers that were made throughout the years. There are several different extinguishing agents that you see displayed here. Everything from carbon tetrachloride to powder to soda acid, a soda acid extinguisher, which is just water and soda and sulfuric acid. The most prominent type of fire extinguisher that you'll see is a soda acid fire extinguisher, and this one is still full. But this simply consists of 2.5 gallons of water mixed with a pound box of baking soda, and right in the top here you have a cage that sets right down on the threads here, and that cage contains a small bottle of sulfuric acid. And what happens when you have a fire, you grab this extinguisher, you turn it upside down, you'll notice that the hose comes off the top and not the bottom. You turn it upside down, and when you turn it upside down, the sulfuric acid mixes with the soda water, creates CO2 gas, which pressurizes the water that's inside, and you could throw a stream of water from here to the end of the building. Now, it doesn't last long. It's only 2.5 gallons of water, but these were the fire extinguishers that you saw most often for a number of years. These are just powder extinguishers that you just take, open the can, and just throw them at the fire. This is the same thing. These are carbon tetrachloride extinguishers. Now, these are a different animal. They are all the same thing, regardless of the way, of the configuration of the container. These things would hang out in the open in a building, and I assume that's the reason they are configured differently, so that they would be more appealing to look at. But they all contain carbon tetrachloride. The issue with carbon tetrachloride, was outlawed as an extinguishing agent in the early 50s. Carbon tetrachloride, when it is heated, will convert to phosgene gas. Phosgene gas, a couple of breaths of phosgene gas will kill you. So you could throw the bottle of carbon tetrachloride, hopefully it'd put the fire out, but as the carbon tetrachloride converted to a vapor, if you inhaled that vapor, it had the potential to kill you. So they were outlawed years ago. Most of these things are very thin glass, but the intent here is you could hang this on a wall, and if you had a trash can here, there is a mechanism here just like a sprinkler head. With this thing hanging above a trash can or a piece of machinery or whatever, when a fire started, it would melt this fusible link here. There is a spring back here holding back a pin. When that solder melts, that pin comes out and breaks this, and the liquid goes down. The other way that you use these things is to simply throw them. Again, it is very thin glass, and when you handle these things, you've got to be very careful that you've got a tight hold on them. But again, if there were a fire back here in the corner somewhere, I'd stand here and lob this thing over to the fire, and hopefully it would put the fire out. Hopefully I don't breathe the vapors, and everything is fine from there. They're all the same, except for one that is like this. This is the same thing. It's a carbon tetrachloride extinguisher, but it's dressed up so that it is more visually appealing. You can see the link down here that's got the drop of solder on it. This is the pin. If this thing were hanging over a fire, this is a bottle of carbon tetrachloride. The difference in the others is that this acts kind of like a sprinkler head. We'll put this back in here. If you'll look at this container, you'll see weep holes right down here. So what happens, the link breaks the bottle, the carbon tetrachloride goes into the cup here and comes out these weep holes in a spray pattern. And it gives you the effect of a sprinkler system, and hopefully put the fire out. We have here a compilation of convention badges from the fire service. They go back as early as 1832. Firefighters had organizations outside of their own department that they belonged to, such as organizations such as Virginia State Firefighters Association. There's a Virginia Fire Chiefs Association, Cumberland Valley Firefighters Association. There are organizations that volunteer fire companies could belong to, whose purpose was to unite the fire companies and help promote legislation and do those kinds of things which would further the the purpose of the fire service. These badges are badges that you would get when you went to what was a fireman's convention. Nowadays they call them a conference. It's the same thing. Fireman's convention. You would go register at a fire convention and you would get your badge. Well, think about what you get if you go to a conference somewhere today. You get a little plastic badge that's got your name on it, maybe where you were from, and that's it. But look how elaborate some of these badges are. You have badges here with photographs of people on them, just numerous parts to the badge. Think about how cost prohibitive it would be to produce one of these badges today and then give them maybe to 800 to 1,000 people that you hope to attend your conference. We also have a collection of badges here that badge collectors would swoon over. We have a badge from San Francisco Fire Department. We have a badge that's labeled the Chief Engineer from Los Angeles Fire Department. Chief Engineer in Los Angeles is now the Fire Chief. So this is actually the Fire Chief's badge. There's a badge here from Louisville, Kentucky, and a number of others. So it's a very nice compilation of badges. This frame has been redone. The old frame was such that we had to redo it, but we've got the original glass in it. And I'm sure you can't see it, but if you look close, you'll see the air bubbles in this glass that tell you that this glass has quite a bit of age to it. The flashing light that you see hanging in the ceiling here is one of the first traffic signals that the city had. I can't tell you where it hung in the city. I know that it came out of a bar, and the person who donated it for display here, it told me just that he got it from a bar, but the individual who had it hanging in his bar had no idea where in the city that it came from. This is a fire alarm box. The purpose of this box is to provide a means for people to report a fire if you're out on the street somewhere and discover a fire. Now, keep in mind that this was installed on the streets somewhere around 1905 or 1909. Some of these things are still in service in some bigger cities around the country. The concept here is that you don't have cell phones, you don't have telephones hanging in telephone booths. That's just not available. This was prominent when before all of that equipment became popular. The idea is this box would be sitting on Main Street somewhere. If you noticed a fire when you were on Main Street, you would open this box. And there's a note here. It says, pull hook way down and then let go. And what you would do is put your finger in there and pull that hook down and just let it go. That clicking that you hear would go to a answering station somewhere. In our case, there were only about 9 boxes in the city of Harrisonburg, and they went to the police department to be answered. So this bell would have been hanging in the police department, and as that box continued to click, there's a little key in there that gives it the number that it's supposed to report. In this case, it would be box 61. This bell would ring 6 times, wait a second, and ring 1 time, and that would tell whoever was on duty at the police station that this was box 61. And obviously, he had a chart somewhere that said box 61 is at the corner of Main and Elizabeth Streets. And then he would dispatch the fire department to that corner. Now, not only could you report the fire, there is a telegraph in here. If you pull up and you see that the whole place is on fire and you need more help, you could use this telegraph key in here and telegraph back to the police station, hey, we got a big fire, we need more people. By the same token, if there was no fire, you could telegraph, no fire found, or I'm on the way back to the firehouse. So it was two-way communications, and you needed to know a little bit about how to use a telegraph in order to use that function. And the bell has a key to it, and the bell will wind down. Now, it's fully wound now, but after this bell would sound 6-1, the spring would unwind, and you'd have to wind in that spring again so that it's ready for the next time somebody pulled a station somewhere. The bell that you see before you is the city's first fire alarm. When you are being served by volunteer organizations, such as the city was back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, you had to have a way to signal to the firefighters that there was a problem, somewhere that they needed to respond to. And again, this bell is the first fire alarm that the city had to do that. Now, this bell was set atop the fire station that's in this photograph here. This fire station, Hose Company number 4, was a joint building built by the city and the volunteers of Hose Company number 4. It's set right on the corner right over here, right outside our windows. And it was built in 1910, and part of the construction included a bell tower that this bell sat on. This bell came from Otterbein United Methodist Church, which you can see if you look right straight through the first 2 windows that you see here. You see a gray church and a bell tower. The bell was gifted to the city by Otterbein United Methodist Church and served for a number of years as the city's first fire alarm. We have an example of a different hose reel. I mentioned that they were configured differently for various companies. This hose reel came from Dayton, Virginia, which is about 3 miles up the road on Route 42. And as you can see, it has more equipment on it than the reel that we viewed earlier with Hose Company number 4. These are the nozzles that would be attached to the hose that came off. By comparison today, the nozzle that the firefighter holds on to is maybe about that long and has a control, the open and shut control. These have no open and shut control. You controlled the water by shutting down the engine that was pumping to it or turning off the fire hydrant that was pumping to it. You also see a couple of axes mounted on either side. We have on the back of this reel a toolbox. The toolbox would be used to carry the tools that you use to connect and disconnect the hose. When you put the hose together, you put it together hand tight, but as it sets on the reel for a good while before you go to your next call, sometimes they will freeze up and it takes more effort to get them loose. So you would carry wrenches in here with which you would use to disconnect the hose. You would also carry a hydrant wrench in here that would operate the fire hydrant, both the connections on the side where you connect the hose as well as the nut on the top where you turned it on and off. As the years went by with the fire service, eventually cities and towns started putting in water lines to be able to provide fire protection as well as providing domestic water. But the first water lines that were put in were wooden water lines, and that's something that's just unheard of today. But the wooden water lines would be installed in underground. The firefighters would know where these water lines were, and the idea was that when you went to a fire, you would locate one of these water lines. You would dig a hole down to where this water line was, and it would be down just far enough so that the water wouldn't freeze. You would cut a hole in that water line. It would fill up the hole that you dig a hole around where you're cutting the water line. It would fill it up, and then you would have your bucket brigades take the water out of the hole. The water lines were made out of like 4x6 pieces of wood, and we have an example of one right here. Now, the amazing thing to me about these things is how could they drill that hole back in the early 1900s or even before that and get it through this 4x6 piece of wood for whatever length that that the wood pipe was. They had to lay these things in length, 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, whatever the length of wood was. Today, you would do that very easily. You'd use a laser sight. You'd use some electronic means to guide the drill bit that went straight through that piece of wood to cut that 2.5-inch hole. Back in the early 1900s or the late 1800s, they didn't have that technology. They didn't have lasers. They didn't have GPS. They didn't have any of that type of thing. And how they could bore that hole through a length of wood and get it straight through there is just, it just astounds me that could be done. But you can see the size of this, again, is a 4x6 piece of wood in whatever length that it was, with a 2.5-inch or 3-inch hole all the way through it. This is a chemical entry suit. The Harrisonburg Fire Department has been in the hazardous materials business since about 1980, probably 81 or 82. By code of the state of Virginia, local fire departments are responsible for hazardous materials incidents that occur within their locality. So we got into the hazmat arena before that legislation was passed, but again, now it's a requirement. The issue with hazardous materials, as opposed to most other types of incidents that we go to, is the fact that you can't be in a hurry. You have got to identify the chemical that you're working with before you can take any offensive action. If we go to a fire, we pull up to the fire, pull the hose off, the guys mask up, and they go through the door to put the fire out. If we go to a hazmat incident, we go to where the incident is, stay back 1,000 feet, and try to identify through binoculars the numbers on the tanker, the number on the trailer, so that we can look in some of our resource books and figure out what the material is. We cannot commit firefighters until we know what the material is, because we have got to equip them with a proper protective gear before we can send them into a vapor cloud, or before we can let them walk through a puddle of whatever the chemical happens to be. This is a butyl rubber hazardous material suit. It's one of the first ones that the city bought. The issue with anything is, in the fire service, we do everything by the buddy system. It's never one person going to do a job. He always has somebody with him, so it's always two people. With hazardous materials, if you commit a team to take either offensive or defensive actions, you commit two people, because again, you've got to have the buddy system. If something happens to me, there's somebody that'll drag me out. In addition to that, you have a backup team. So if something happens to both of us, there's still somebody to drag us out. And that backup team has to be dressed just exactly like the entry team. This suit cost the city $8,000 back in 1982. And not only did we have to buy one of these suits, we had to buy 4 of these suits, because you had to have the entry team with the buddy system, and you had to have the backup team. Now, these suits, as you can see, are totally encapsulated. The breathing apparatus would be here. The mask would be on the individual's face here. And it's just as bulky as it can be and as heavy as it can be. We could also put them on an airline if we had enough airline, if we were close enough that we could work on an airline rather than the breathing apparatus. These suits had to be tested once a year. Every year you had to put air in these suits and just blow them up like a balloon and try to identify any leaks that are in this suit, and then you would patch them. There was a special patch kit for this. You can see here, this is a seam, and you can see all the seams have been sealed. This, again, was a butyl rubber suit. It was designed to be used for certain chemicals. We also had another suit that was called a Viton suit, and we'll look at one of those here in just a minute. But the Viton suit was just as expensive as this was. And again, we couldn't buy just one. We had to buy 4 of them. We had to buy one for each of the 2 entry team guys, and we had to have one for each of the 2 backup team members. So today, these suits are not used. You wouldn't even consider using these suits. Technology has evolved till today. We have disposable suits that the firefighters use. Now again, you still have to identify the chemical, and you've got to make sure that the suit that you're putting the firefighter in is compatible with that chemical. But the suits today are disposable. You take them off, you put them in a disposal bag, and it goes off to a hazardous waste dump. This is the Viton suit that I mentioned just a minute ago that we use for hazardous materials. Again, we had to purchase 4 of these rather than just one. As a safety measure, we numbered the suits. You can see that this is suit number 7. They were obviously numbered 1 through 8 in order to keep track of the personnel. When these things were being used, the guys that were on the entry team and the backup team, there was somebody at the command post logging the time that they went in so that we knew how much air they should be having. And at a certain point, 18, 19, 20 minutes, we would be bringing them back out. That's the length of time that they would have to work. You'd have to decontaminate the suit by whatever means our resources tell you. You need to decontaminate. It could be soap and water. It could be some other chemical that it takes to decontaminate the suit, and then put it back into use for the next entry team. This looks like I guess you could call it a trumpet. This, years ago, before there were radios, two-way radios that the fire officers could talk back and forth, was how the officers in command would shout their orders. This is simply a megaphone so that you could sit here and shout orders to whoever's on the fire ground. Now, as time went on, radios were developed. There were other means of communication that the people could talk back and forth to each other. These things have become a symbol of rank in the fire service. They are trumpets. They are very elaborate. I don't know whether you can see the engraving on this. This one, somebody scratched a date in here, February 25th, 1924. This one has been well used. You can see it's been repaired a couple of times. But as they went out of use for shouting orders, they found other uses for them. When Hose Company Number 4 would be in their parade, we talked about the number of people that they would have. There were 2 people in the line of march, 2 lines. And the people on the outside, the first person on the outside would just simply carry this on his hip, and they had a bouquet of red roses in here, both of them. That's how they were used, the last that they had an official use. But today they're used as a symbol of rank in the fire department. If you see a fire chief badge, he will have a scramble in the center of his badge that has 5 trumpets crossed. A deputy fire chief will have 4, a battalion chief will have 3, a captain will have 2, a lieutenant will have 1. So they've gone from being a means of communication to a symbol of rank. And we've got 2 here. These things were very prevalent years ago, and I'm not quite sure how they all got out away from us, but these are the only 2 that we've been able to hang on to. This is an original watercolor that was done by a gentleman named Austin Lohner. Austin Lohner did a number of watercolors here throughout the city, and I'm aware of 2 or 3 others. One that shows the fire that destroyed the south side of Court Square in the early part of the 1900s. This drawing shows the reel that we first looked at, the first reel that belonged to Hose Company Number 4. This is a drawing of that reel, and as you can see, it's got Hose Company Number 4 up at the top in the date of 1890. That's when Hose Company Number 4 was formed. Austin Lohner did these, I would say sometime in the 1940s, but it shows a reel house. That reel and Hose Company Number 4, before the station was built in 1910, was located on East Elizabeth Street, just across the railroad tracks from where we are right now. But Austin did this, an original watercolor, and presented it to the fire department. Again, he has done several others, but he is a well-known local artist. This display, features an old-time fire chief for the city back in the early 1900s. This is Al Brathwaite. Al was fire chief in the early 1920s. Before that, he was police chief for the city. And you have here his badge as he was from where he was fire chief. This is a whistle that he used when he was police chief. But you can see the badge, his fire chief's badge. Here's photos of Al in other places, but there's the badge. You can see the badge. Well, he doesn't have it there, but you can see it on his shirt, as well as one of the convention badges here. So, but he was a well-known fire chief for the city, and he was well-known throughout the state. This is a cane that he used. It's got a silver inlay here that's got his name and title on it. This is his picture. I looked at this picture for years until thinking that it was a picture. And finally, something hit me one day. This is a neckerchief slide that Al used for his parade shirt. This is his parade shirt. This is the neckerchief slide. Well, you can see this is a drawn neckerchief slide. This is not the actual neckerchief slide. But this picture, this drawing is so realistic that I thought for years this was a picture of Al Brathwaite. This is a drawing of Al Brathwaite, not a picture. But look how lifelike that drawing is. This is an old parade belt that you see here that Hose Company Number 4 used. And this shirt is actually hanging over in the other hallway. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But again, it was years before I realized that this was not a picture, that this was a drawing of Al Brathwaite. This is the rescue net that was delivered to the city with a 1954 ladder truck that the city purchased new. The purpose of the net is for people who need to jump out of a building because it's the only way that you can rescue them. Now there's a limit as to how high they can be. You can't be over about 3 stories high, which is typically about 30 feet, to jump in this net, or you can really get hurt. The net takes at least a dozen or so people to hold. It's folded up here. As you can see, we had quite a discussion about how to display it without taking up so much floor space, and one of the folks that worked for me said, just put a mirror behind it and fold it in half. And he said it jokingly, but that's exactly what we did. We put a mirror behind it and it looks like it's opened up. Now this would actually fold one more time into a quarter of what you see, and that's how it was stored on the ladder truck. But the net is not as hard to use as you might think of somebody jumping 30 feet into the net. The idea is when you jump kind of like in the cannonball position, just like you're jumping into a swimming pool. You aim for the red dot. But the people holding the net would be holding the net in this position, up as high as you could hold it. And just visualize at least a dozen people around this net. Now these handholds that you see on here swivel. You can see they turn. So the idea is you hold the net up like this. When somebody jumps, they jump and again aim for the red circle. When they hit, everybody who's holding the net brings the net down here, and that absorbs the impact. When you bring that net down, it just absorbs the impact of the person hitting the net, and you feel their weight, whether they're 100 pounds or 200 pounds, but it's not like the tremendous impact that you would think you have because of the way that you use it. The net, as you can see, is here in the museum. It never has been used in a rescue. Again, we got the net in 1954. We used to have to jump into the net every year as part of our training from either a second or third story. You know, it's just old hat to jump in it, again, in a cannonball position, and it's just nothing to it. After the people jump in the net, you just simply tilt it and let them crawl out of it, and that's it. This is an old fallout shelter sign that came from the municipal building in Harrisonburg, which is down on South Main Street. Years ago, when there was a threat of the atom bomb and nuclear war and all that kind of thing, the state went through the localities in Virginia and picked out buildings that they thought would be suitable for fallout shelters. And they had to meet a certain criteria. You know, they had to have underground facilities, and they had to be able to hold a certain number of people and that kind of thing. But when they identified a building that was suitable for a fallout shelter, they put a sign on it. And people were very much aware in the 1950s and early 60s of what these signs were for. Nowadays, nobody would even recognize one of them. The sign that you see above the fallout shelter sign is a street sign that came from the intersection of Cantrell Avenue and Mason Street, which is just about 5 blocks away from where we are. Cantrell Avenue about 10 years ago was renamed Martin Luther King Boulevard to honor Dr. Martin Luther King. It's about the newest addition here to the museum, but I just happened to be going down the street in my city vehicle when they took that sign down, and I just stopped and said, you know, guys, just put it in the back of my car. I got a place for it. And this is where it wound up. Again, not that old, but another couple of years, it's gonna have some significance, and it's just one of those things, you grab it when you have the opportunity. As with the fallout shelter sign and the Cantrell Avenue sign, there are things in the museum that don't pertain necessarily to the fire department, but they're part of the city's history, and we've had an opportunity to grab a hold of a couple of those things, and that's what you see here. This is an old oak bench that came out of the Greyhound bus station. That used to be 2 doors down here on Main Street. That is now, the space is now occupied by the Golden Pony. So if you know where the Golden Pony is, you know where the old Greyhound bus station used to be. But this was a bench on the inside that the folks used to wait on buses. You see a picture here of the front door and a sign over the front door that shows the Greyhound logo. And above my left shoulder here, you see the sign that hung behind the bus station. The buses would come in and go down Wolf Street and come in behind the bus station and go up a set of stairs and into what is now the Golden Pony. As we go on down this way, you see a large sign that is from the Mickermack. Mickermack used to be a local grocery chain. They had 3 stores in Harrisonburg, and they had, I don't know, 3 or 4 more stores. They had one in Grottoes, and they had one in West Virginia, and I'm not sure where all they had them. But they had one on Main Street in the center of town. They had one on South Main Street, and they had one up at the corner of Wolf Street and Mason Street. What you see in front of that is a water application appliance. And you'll see certain things hanging around the ceiling here. This was something that you would put on the end of the hose nozzle. You would attach it to the nozzle, and if I wanted to get water up in this ceiling, instead of climbing on a ladder to get up there, I could just jam that up through the ceiling and apply water that way. And there's a number of those hanging around here. You'll also see as you go around what are called pike poles. They're just wooden poles with hooks on the end, and those poles are used to either push or pull whatever you need to use them for when you're overhauling, which is putting out the small spot fires after a larger fire. Again, they've got a hook on the end that you can use to either push or pull, and there's a number of those hanging around, particularly in this area of the museum. What you see here is a barber shop set up at the north end of the city. When I was growing up, which would have been in the 1950s, there was a barber shop called Hickey's Barber Shop, and you could go to Hickey's Barber Shop and get a haircut for $1, and that's what I did a number of times. But this is Hickey's barber chair, again from the 40s and 50s. This is a sink out of his barber shop. This is a picture of his barber shop, and if you look closely at the picture through the window, you'll see Hickey in there cutting somebody's hair. There's somebody sitting in his chair. This is one of the first telephones that came to Harrisonburg. When I got this telephone and opened up this box to make sure everything was cleaned out, this note was in there, and this note says, first telephone of grandfather Emanuel Suter. The first call was made, and the date was March 25th, 1895. So that's how old this telephone is. And again, it's not fire service related, but it's part of the city's history, and that's why it's here. Real quick, this is just a simple old metal bench that's set in front of Hose Company number 4 on Rock Street. There was an identical bench that's set in front of Fire Company number 1, which was over on Newman Avenue, where the parking lots are now exist. But these benches were in front of the fire stations for as long as I can remember. My dad, as I mentioned before, was an assistant fire chief for Hose Company number 4, so when we were kids, whenever Dad would go to the fire station, we'd go with him. And when you went to the fire station, you sat on the bench. So we spent a good deal of time on these benches. There were actually 4 of them, and we've got 2 of them here in the museum. We have a mock-up here of several buildings on fire. You can see the flames through the window, and the flames through the roof, and the smoke coming out of the various buildings. Also, we have on display here an escape ladder. To put the thought in your mind, maybe if I have a 2 or 3 story house, I ought to have an escape ladder for my kids to be able to get out if a fire should occur. But the main purpose of this is just to let the kids have a little bit of fun. We have over on the rack here turnout gear size to fit small kids, and the intent is for them to be able to put that turnout gear on, come over and take this hose out of this hook that the firefighter is holding it in, and to be able to hold the hose and let their parents take pictures of them putting the fire out. This is an example of a hose reel, or actually an extinguisher reel. This came from the Broadway Fire Department, which is about 16 miles northwest, I guess, of the city. This operates somewhat under the same concept of the other reels that we've looked at. The intent is to just tip this thing over when you have a fire to respond to, and pull this. Now this doesn't have an attachment for the rope, so I guess you'd have guys pulling this as well as pushing it. When you turn this over, obviously the tank is laying horizontal, and you pull it to wherever the fire is. Once you get to wherever the fire is, you lay the handle down, and this is a giant soda acid fire extinguisher. There's a sulfuric acid container in here. There's about probably 25 gallons of water and some soda that's been mixed in here. And again, just as with a soda acid extinguisher, when it's inverted, the acid mixes with the soda water, creates a CO2 gas, and forces it out the hose and the nozzle that's on the end of the hose. Firefighters have to calculate the weight of water continuously. When you're throwing water in buildings, you have to realize how much water you're throwing in. And we calculate, for the purpose of calculation for the fire service, we use 10 pounds per gallon of water. So if there's 25 gallons of water in this tank, that means the water in this tank weighs 250 pounds, not including the weight of the apparatus itself. So that gives you an idea of again, how much effort it takes to use something like this. Firefighters respond to all different kinds of emergencies, including technical rescue. This is an example of what we would classify as a technical rescue event. We have an individual that is strapped inside this stretcher. This is called a Stoke stretcher. And this is an example of how this would look if this individual had to be rescued from the top of a building, whatever they may be up on. But if the only way to get them down, and this would be a last resort, because they take them down the steps, take them down the elevator, whatever is easiest. But if they can't get them down any other way and have to bring them over the side of the building, this is an example of what that would look like. This rope would be attached to an aerial ladder somewhere, and the aerial ladder would come over to the edge of the building where this thing would be snapped in. And typically a firefighter would be riding down on a separate rope to make sure that nothing happens to the patient, to make sure that the basket doesn't start spinning, just to make sure that everything goes as it should go until they reach the ground. As you walk through the museum, you'll see in various places these types of nozzles sitting around on display. These are called deluge nozzles. These are the largest nozzles that the fire service uses. And if this nozzle has what we call a 2-inch tip on it, it can flow as much as 1,000 gallons a minute. If you multiply that by the 10 pounds that we calculate for the weight of water when we're determining how much water we're using or how much water we're storing, you can tell how much weight we add to a building as we're putting out a fire. That water goes into the building, it adds to the weight of the building. That sometimes contributes to the collapse of buildings. So we've got to be careful how much water we're putting in buildings, but at the same time we've got to put the fire out. But these things will start flowing water with this small tip at about 600 gallons per minute. And if you take it off to this tip, you'll be flowing about 1,000 gallons of water a minute. A fire truck can pump anywhere, the ones that the city uses, up to 1,500 gallons of water a minute. Now, as you can see down here, this is the intake. This is where the supply hoses come in, and this has room for 3. We have smaller nozzles that will also flow 1,000 gallons a minute that have 2 inlets for it. So it takes 2 supply hoses. We've got some that take 4. So it just depends on what type of appliance you order when you order your fire truck, because these typically come with a new fire truck. What you see here is a drawing of Fire Station 1 on Maryland Avenue. And these are the letters that originally were on the building that was in this space right here beside the front door. What's unique about this is that this drawing was made in 1969 or 1970. It is a painting. Now, what's unique about that is today, if you're having an architect or an engineer or somebody make a building proposal to you, they're going to design a building and put it on a computer and give you a computer drawing of it. And if you need 10 copies of it, they'll just run 10 copies off their computer. Back when this was done, there were no computers doing that type of thing. If you were making a building proposal, you had to paint a drawing or draw a drawing of the building. And that's what this is. This is an oil painting of Fire Station Number 1 that was presented with a proposal to the city of this is what this building will look like that we're proposing. You can see up along the edge here where they tested paint colors to be used down in the painting. But this is, I like this. This is just very unique in that It's a painting that is now no longer done. You know, that nobody would consider doing this today. As we go down this hallway, you'll see a number of pictures of action pictures of the fire department and the personnel of the fire department. We talked a little bit about the number of people who volunteered back in the early 1900s and late 1800s. And this photo here is an example of that. This is Hose Company number 4, this entire photo. And this was at a convention in 1920. Again, the numbers of people that you see there, nowhere near these types of numbers today as far as the volunteer system is concerned. But this is a convention. From here to here is Hose Company number 4, and the rest are other people who attended the convention. Here is a truck that was delivered to the city in 1948. It's a GMC. It was later sold to McGaheysville Fire Company when they were formed. The city just bought this truck back just within the last several months and is in the process of relettering it just to put it back in the condition that it was when it was purchased. So this is the delivery of the 1954 ladder truck that we mentioned with the net, the rescue net. This truck was delivered by train car. Today, if you buy a fire truck, you know, they drive it to wherever you are. But this was delivered to a train, in a train car to the depot on South Liberty Street, right out where the Rocco feed mill is. Pictures of the retired personnel of the city. Some more action pictures here. This is a description of a fire that happened in 1960. This fire occurred over on East Market Street in the area where Burger King is. And there were 5 people that died in this fire. This is, to my knowledge, the largest loss of life in a fire in Harrisonburg. But again, that was back in 1960. This is more of the conference badges that we looked at on the other side. In fact, what's in this case came out of that case. It was just so many jammed in there. When we had it reframed, we had to take some out and put it in another case. The picture that we showed, the drawing of Al Brathwaite, this is the parade shirt that Al Brathwaite had on in that picture. This was not his hat, but this is an example of an old parade hat from Hose Company number 4. This just depicts a couple of people who have passed away and who were given firefighter funerals. This is a picture of the 4 fire stations from the air. This is a fire that occurred on June 29, 1979 at Jess's Lunch, which was a hamburger shop in Harrisonburg, a very well-known hamburger shop. The fire extended into a jewelry store next door, the Jewel Box, and the display that you see here, the reason for such a large display is we lost a firefighter in that fire. A firefighter went in with his breathing apparatus, something happened to his apparatus, and he was found unconscious inside with the space piece off. The firefighter was not a Harrisonburg firefighter. He was from one of the mutual aid companies, Bridgewater Fire Company, which was the first mutual aid company closest to Harrisonburg. And again, the guy's name is Eddie Karakoff. I knew Eddie, but again, he went in, something happened with his breathing apparatus, and you know, that was it. So, an example of license tags for firefighters that have been given throughout the years by the city. Some more convention tags that you see. We talked about the hose reel and Hose Company number 4 being one of the fastest teams. This is a trophy that they won in 1909 in the reel race. You'll see pictures here. This is the reel that first reel that we looked at for Hose Company number 4 in the pictures that you see here. And you'll see what I talked about over there, where you've got 2 people back here at the handle and then about a dozen more spread out on the rope. Numerous action photos of the fire companies down through the years. This is an interesting device. This came on the 1954 ladder truck that we talked about. This is called a Davies Life Belt. Now, I have never seen this used. I know the department has never used it, but the concept was to be able to rescue multiple people off of a building. The 1954 ladder truck was an 85-foot ladder truck, so it would go up about 7 stories. The idea was if you had multiple people that you had to rescue somewhere within those 7 stories, you could take this box that you see right at the top and clamp it on the top of the ladder. That box is full of gears, just full of gears. You can see you have a strap right here at this end. Down at the other end, you have a strap that's similar to it. And the concept was that you would put somebody who needed to be rescued in this strap, lower them off the ladder, and they would just come down at a slow pace. That is guaranteed by the gears that are in this box. It just slows down whatever is on the end of this strap. Now, as this strap comes down, that strap goes up. So when this one hits the ground, you've got another strap up there ready to put somebody in to bring them down, and it's just continuous. The concept is just to have people coming down one right after the other. Never seen it used, never trained with it. It's just something that just never did get wide use in the fire service. We talked about the carbon tetrachloride fire extinguishers. This extinguisher is of the same concept. Now this is heavier glass, but the idea is you can throw this, and again, when it hits wherever you throw it, it'll break and hopefully put the fire out. Some of these things, other than carbon tetrachloride, were filled with just salt water. The key was you had to have a liquid in here that would not freeze, because a lot of times you'd find them in warehouses, unheated warehouses, or spaces that just did not have very much heat. So you could do the same thing with salt water as you did with carbon tetrachloride, except that the salt water won't kill you. The carbon tetrachloride will. This is my favorite picture. This picture was taken in 1896 somewhere on East Market Street, and it's got a list of the people who were in this picture. The city had a ladder truck that was built locally, and that's what this is a picture of. And again, there's a list of names here. If you could read them, they'll tell you who's on here. But my favorite thing about this is that if you're familiar with Norman Rockwell and some of the paintings that he did, somewhere in the background you'd see a child peeking through whatever activity was going on in that painting. If you look in this picture here, there is a kid with his head stuck through the spokes of that wheel right there, just looking through to see what's going on. It's very hard to see, very hard to make out, but he's right there. And that's my favorite picture down here. So, this display depicts an explosion that happened on South Main Street at the corner of Bruce Street in 1947. It was a strip of stores that looked like this, but the biggest impact was when in a beauty shop called Pauline's Beauty Shop. And this explosion occurred in the basement, wrecked the building, and killed 11 people. This says 10 people killed and 19 injured. An additional lady died the next day. So actually there were 11 people killed in this explosion. The building is called the Masters Building. Again, it was just like a strip shopping center here with a couple of stores in it. What happened years ago, a lot of heating was done by coal. You know, people had coal furnaces, and that's the way this building was built. And the way you got your coal, a truck would pull up to your basement window and either run off on a conveyor the coal to go down in the basement, or shovel it off the truck through a window. And then you had to go down in the basement and take that coal pile that you just delivered through the window and shovel it over to where they wanted it stored. You know, it might be around the corner, it might be right next door, but you had to make sure that the coal got to where it was supposed to be stored. And that's what was taking place. A delivery driver delivered the coal, went downstairs, and was shoveling the coal over to the coal pile, took a break, lit a cigarette, and the cigarette ignited natural gas that had filtered into the building. Not sure what the source was, but it ignited the natural gas, and an explosion occurred, and again, wrecked the shopping center and killed 11 people. You can see various photos throughout here of rescues or body recoveries, not rescues, body recoveries being made, and the site as it happened back then. If you're a firefighter in today's society, you don't do anything without turnout gear. You don't do, you got your gloves, you got your helmet, you got your coat, you got your boots, you got your breathing apparatus. You are completely dressed out when you're doing any of the activities that you see here. Again, this was in 1947, before any of that occurred, before safety procedures were put into place for fire departments. And you can't find a turnout coat or a helmet, hardly even a pair of gloves on anybody's hand in any of these pictures. And it just shows you how the fire service has transformed from 1947 to the way it is today. We talk about the carbon tetrachloride fire extinguishers, about how fragile they were and about how careful you had to be with them. This is another example, as are these. If you owned a business or a store or whatever, and you had these throughout your building, you also would have a supply cabinet that kept a supply of extinguishers in case you had to use one. So if you had to use one and put the fire out, you take one out of your supply and you're good to go. Today's firefighter wears self-contained breathing apparatus on their back. It can be a 30-minute, it can be a 15-minute, it can be a 1-hour unit. But it's a tank that you wear on your back. It's heavy. You got straps that come over your shoulders, strap that goes around your waist. And that's what you use when you go into a fire nowadays, or go into any environment, hostile environment. And the air that you're breathing comes out of that tank that you're carrying on your back. And it can be good for up to an hour. Prior to that, what was used in the fire service was the all-purpose mask. And there's not very many of us left that have ever used an all-purpose mask. Prior to the self-contained breathing apparatus, this is what you use to go inside a fire. You had this face piece that connected to this canister. The way you would use it, when you got ready to use it, there's a tab that you pull off here that opens up to the inside of this canister. This canister is lined with multiple layers of chemicals, and the idea is that it would filter the smoke until it got up to your face piece. The problem is that this canister did not filter the types of gases that are produced by plastics and synthetics today. So that if you use this today in a house fire somewhere, you'll wind up in a hospital, because this canister will not filter the gases that are produced by burning plastics and synthetic materials. But again, this is what we used back then. It was like trying to breathe with your finger or your hand right up against your mouth and trying to suck in air like that. It was because you had to actually draw the air all the way up through here. It had a timer on it that is right here that told you how much time you had left on this. But if you're in a smoky environment, such as you are inside a structure fire, you'll never see that. And you only know that it's that the canister is being used up by the fact that it's getting even more hard to breathe. Obviously, every fire truck has a siren, every ambulance has a siren, every police car has a siren, and there are various types of sirens that are on these apparatus. It can be an old it can be a mechanical siren, or it can be an electronic siren. The mechanical sirens use electricity to turn a sound wheel that's inside the siren itself that produces a sound. The electronic sirens use electronics to produce the sound. In earlier years, before they had electric sirens on fire trucks had sirens that were hand cranked, just like this siren. And as you're driving the fire truck, hopefully there's somebody riding in the front seat with you that can use the siren. And they had to do that all the way to the fire. Now, if it was a short run, it's not so bad. But these things don't crank easy, and if you had quite a ways to go to use this siren, I promise you the guy that's doing hand cranking here will be worn out till he gets to where he's going.